So there's a lot happening in 1794. We talked about the two countries that were at war with one another, and this was an engagement known as the Quasi-War. It was between Great Britain and France. And so each side tried drawing the United States into their conflict, but America said, we're going to stay neutral. And so, again, once they're fighting, doesn't mean that Americans did not want to help one side over another. Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton, said we should help Great Britain. They are our strongest financial trade partner. They are a wealthy country. They're pretty much the most powerful country in the world at this time, even though they couldn't keep us under reins and they lost us and we declared independence. They're still a very powerful country. And they're powerful because they have a lot of wealth and resources. Jefferson and other political activists known as Democratic Republicans said we should help France. France helped us during the Revolutionary War. Without their aid in that war for independence, we may not have won the war against the British, and we might still be subjects to the British crown. So Jefferson and James Madison, eventually later on, and others who kind of were of that Democratic Republican Party said France is going to be a better ally. But Washington, being the wise military general that he was, said getting involved when we can't afford it, getting involved when we don't need to is pointless. Why involve yourself in a fight if you don't need to, right? That's like if you see a bee's nest, you don't want to go and poke the bee's nest when they're leaving you alone. Why would you want to give them reason to come after you? So Washington said, we can't afford a war. We don't want to lose an ally. Right now, we're loosely allied with the British and with the French, so let's not ruin that. So Washington in 1793 issued his Neutrality Proclamation, which said that the United States would not get involved in any foreign conflict. And this is important because when we talk later about George Washington's farewell address, that really hits home. So the reaction to Washington's neutrality, well, the British relied on American trade, and so scorned and upset that the Americans did not help them, they started seizing American ships, which means that they started hijacking them, taking the sailors on board, taking their cargo, in some cases destroying the cargo and dumping it into the ocean, which angered many Americans. And many Americans said, I don't know about you, Washington, but we want war. We can't stand for this. The British are at us again. They're bullying us, and we want to put them in their place. So trying to avoid war, Washington sent John Jay over to negotiate with the British, and they negotiated something called Jay's Treaty in 1794, where the British agreed in this treaty to return any seized sailors and cargo, and also to pay for the damages. Okay, so one of our vocab words today was treaty, and a treaty basically is an agreement or a negotiation with a group, so between two groups. And usually a treaty involves peace, or it involves coming to an understanding where each side feels a little bit better after this agreement. The British also agreed to leave the Ohio Valley and basically leave the U.S. territory. So there were many Americans who were like, why are the British still here? We own this land now. We won it from them. And the Treaty of France in 1783, or the Treaty of Paris, I should say, to end the Revolutionary War, the British basically agreed to give us this land, but they haven't left yet. So Jay's Treaty was a positive negotiation between the Americans and the British to put a stop to the British bullying us because they were upset that we didn't help them in their war against France. The big problem with Jay's Treaty was that many felt that this did nothing, and it really was just lip service. It didn't do anything to prevent it from happening again. So imagine that you are beat up, or you are attacked by a bully at school or by somebody. They pick a fight with you. They throw a couple punches. They bloody your lip. They give you a couple bruises on your cheek. And then you go to the principal's office, both of you, and all the principal asks is that they tell you that they're sorry. Okay? They don't give them any consequences. They don't have them sign some sort of behavior contract saying that if they do this again, then there's going to be, further consequences. All you get is a sorry. And you know that it's really like a forced apology, right? I'm sure some of you have gotten a forced apology from somebody because an adult told them to. So imagine if you get into a fight with a brother or sister and your parents say, tell them you're sorry. And they say, I'm sorry. and it's fake, that they don't mean it. That's kind of what many Americans felt after Jay's Treaty, is that the British were really just faking an apology, and it wasn't saying anything about them respecting us in the future. Now, another thing that was going on, and we talked about this in an earlier class, was farmers were angry at a tax that was placed on all liquor, okay, mainly whiskey. And whiskey was the dominant social alcohol at that time. So it was a social drink. Now, farmers and whiskey makers were upset at this tax because if people were buying less and less whiskey, that means that whiskey makers didn't have as much demand for their product, and therefore they didn't need to buy as much from the farmers. So it's kind of that domino effect where the tax goes on the whiskey drinkers drink less whiskey, the whiskey makers then make less whiskey, and the farmers are selling less corn and wheat to those distillers. And so farmers ultimately were the ones that were taking the biggest hit. So they got angry and they rebelled, or they revolted against the government. In some cases, they were attacking whiskey tax collectors. In some cases, they were setting fire to courthouses and government buildings because they were trying to collect these taxes. And remember, this was really the first major federal tax that was placed after the U.S. Constitution gave Congress the power to levy taxes. And so with all these protests going on, George Washington, the president of our country, knew that he had to do something to send a message. If he didn't do anything, it would send the message that protesters could just revolt and rebel anytime they wanted to. So if he did that, then our country could have crumbled. And this is very similar to what we experienced last week with the protests on Washington and the Capitol building. So back in 1794, George Washington said, I'm going to use our military force. So one of the responsibilities as president of the United States is they're in charge of the military. They're the commander in chief. So they can call to arms the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. Back at this time, America really just had an armed military. They didn't even really have a naval force yet. So he called in 1,500 soldiers to put a stop to this rebellion. Actually, I think it was 15,000. And these rebels stopped right away and basically ran from it and didn't really threaten again. So this sent a message that revolutionary thoughts and rebellions, violent rebellions, would not be tolerated. So once again, this made many, especially the Federalist Party, say, we need a stronger federal government because we need something to control these American citizens. It's okay to have disagreements. It's okay to think that what the government is doing is wrong. But when you take it to the step of violence and revolt and rebellion and insurrection, then that's where it puts a lot of people not at ease. So the Whiskey Rebellion was evidence that a stronger government was needed. So we talk about a peace treaty with the British. We also made peace with Spain. So there was a dispute over the Southern Territory in what is now the state of Florida. So Spain controlled not only what is now Florida, but they also controlled all the shipping ports that were in this area surrounded by the Gulf of Mexico and along the Atlantic Ocean. They also controlled parts of the Mississippi River and the Port of New Orleans, which is in present-day Louisiana. And these were valuable shipping and trade ports for America to do trade with, or to do trade from. So in 1795, as a way to try and get access to these shipping ports and to get access to the Mississippi River, they signed what was known as Pinckney's Treaty in 1795, also known as the Treaty of San Lorenzo. And this was a treaty with Spain, or an agreement, a negotiation with Spain, where Americans were allowed to use the shipping ports and the land that was in those areas. So we didn't gain access to that land. We didn't buy Florida. We didn't buy Louisiana or any of that Western territory. But because Spain owned the land, it was basically, they said, we'll allow you to use it. It's oftentimes like if you have a friend that lives down the street and they have a pool and you want to use access to their pool. If they say, hey, even if we're not home, anytime you want to come over and swim, feel free to do so. Even if we are home, if we're not in the pool, feel free to use it. It's yours. We trust you. You're friends of the family. So that's basically what the United States and Spain were agreeing to. Spain was saying, you are able to use our pool. You're able to use part of our land for whatever you want. When I was growing up, I had a neighbor who had a basketball court in their backyard. I didn't have one in my house. And so they allowed me to use their court to play basketball anytime I wanted to shoot baskets, to play pickup games. It was theirs as long as I respected their property. So the United States in this treaty gained valuable land from Spain in namely now what is Alabama and Mississippi, but also that primary shipping port in New Orleans, Louisiana, which is going to become very important when we talk about westward expansion.